Hello, everyone, and welcome. I've got with me today my friend and colleague and coach as well, John Countryman. John is a coach practitioner and teacher of the Inside Out understanding, and I'm delighted to have him with us today to talk about some really wonderful stuff. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here.
So I was going to been meaning to talk to you for a while, and I'd just love to just start off with a bit of an introduction about could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you've ended up doing what you do?
Sure. Well, I have been an academic most of my life. I started doing theater when I was in high school, around 15, 16 years old, and I stuck with it. I studied it in college. I studied it in graduate school. I became a professor of educational theater, academic theater, and I just retired last August. So that's what I was doing. It was a little bit like having two full-time jobs, because I would do my faculty gig in the morning with classes, or during the day, I should say, classes, office hours, working on scholarship, going to committee meetings, all that kind of stuff. And at night, I would go to rehearsals. And so it was a long day, most days, lots of weekends too, with special rehearsals. And once we got into performances, of course, we did those on the weekend as well. I taught everything in theater there is to teach, except for technical theater and design. And I retired in August after technically 38 full-time years as a professor, and I had taught for 5 years as a graduate teaching assistant prior to that. So I was at it for a good while. About 5 years before I retired, actually a little bit longer than that, would be 6 years, I guess. I was anticipating my retirement, and I knew that I didn't want to just sit on a front porch in a rocking chair and vegetate. I wanted to stay active and do something that would give something back. So I had a friend who had been coaching, and she recommended that to me. I trained in a traditional coaching program, which those folks on the call who are coaches know that traditional coaching is very dependent on a toolkit of techniques and strategies that the coach uses with the client, and that the client gives to, or that the coach gives to the client to apply to address a problem or an issue or achieve a goal or whatever it is. And one of the big things with traditional coaching, what's often called life coaching, is the coach's job is basically to get clarity about what the client wants and then keep them accountable when it comes to trying to get it done. About a year into coaching that way, I read Michael Neill's The Inside Out Understanding. That changed everything. I basically jettisoned the traditional approach. I began to train in the three principles, and over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, had quite a bit of training with some of the obvious suspects that people go to get that kind of training. And about 9 months ago, I began to sort of take a business as a transformative coach, as a facilitator, practitioner. I teach it. For example, this morning I spoke to a large group of American veterans, all of whom have struggled with post-traumatic stress syndrome, talking to them about how this understanding could make their life journey a little bit easier. But you know, my primary emphasis in my coaching is going to be showing folks the similarity between what I've done as an improvisational actor, which is based on an understanding as well, not techniques, not how-tos, but an understanding. And the inside out understanding, how they are so similar in many ways. So I've kind of come to clarity about that in recent months, and a lot of my work is probably going to cohere around that.
That sounds fascinating, and I love the fact that you mentioned about post-traumatic stress, because it reminded me of how some performers think about their performances. Actually, that it can be a very very kind of stressful encounter. And of course, those kinds of stresses are coming from the same kind of source. I think we'd probably agree. I'm really interested to talk to you today about that overlap that you talked about improvisation, spontaneity, presence. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Well, what really struck me is that if an improviser, and this is true of musical improviser, but with improvisational acting, you are your own instrument. You're your own artistic material. So it's even a little bit more immediate in the sense of the artist and the medium being the same thing. For an improvisational actor to be good, they need to do what they do with very little on their mind. They need to show up. They need to be present and responsive to what's right in front of them. They're not working from a script. They're not working from a plan. They have to stay clear of any kind of personal thinking as they go ahead, and they need to work with what shows up for them. So they can't go in with an idea of how they're going to make the scene go. They can't go in, there's a lot of ways that I talk to people about improv actors. I talk to them about what gets in the way of being successful as an improv actor. One is to try to get into the scene and then try to direct it toward an outcome that you've already predetermined. I call that the director. Another thing that they can do is they can have a whole scenario in their mind that they take in and try to work. Of course, the other person doesn't know what that scenario is, so it almost inevitably fails. I call that the playwright. And then I have this other thing that I talk about where, obviously if somebody's in their head and they're self-conscious about their performance, the sort of how am I doing while they're doing it thing, then they're not going to be fully present. They're not going to be listening well. Listening is key, both for coaches with clients and improv actors with partners on the stage. Listening is really critical. You're not listening to reply. You're listening to understand. You're pretty much listening as an empty vessel. But what you do in improv is you work with what's in front of you. If somebody is taking you in a particular direction, the mantra is yes and. That is, you agree that this is what the thrust of the scene is going to be about, or at least that's where you're going to start, and you're going to build on that. You don't block a partner. You don't try to one up a partner. The scene is not about you. It's interesting in improv. In improv acting, a lot of people think that the objective of improv acting is to be funny, and that's because of shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway and things like that. And, the fact that sketch comedy of the sort that you see on Saturday Night Live over here was developed improvisationally, but then pinned down in the way that a typical script would be pinned down. The Second City, how the Second City was one of the most famous improv groups would work. They would create something improvisationally, then they would refine it, tweak it, and then they would have a rehearsed scene. That's not the sort of improv that I'm talking about. So what I found, I'll give you an example of how improv has worked in my own life, Nick. Mm-hmm. And I say that because this is where my living energy is. Improv for me is my way of being, my way of life. I see what's in front of me and I work with it. And I add to it. And so I'm in a sort of co-creative process. I was down I'm what's called a collaborative associate with Center for Sustainable Change in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was down there recently, and Dave Nichols, who's who runs the center, took me over to a place, a center for transitional housing. It's like they've taken what was a very large hotel and they've turned it into a transitional housing place where they accommodate people who are transitioning from a life of dependency, a life of homelessness, a life in the military where they have suffered trauma and injury and that sort of thing. And it's a pause place for them to regroup and get themselves back out in the world and back in the game. And while I was there, I was talking, Dave introduced me to the operations manager, who's a fellow by the name of Nate Moore. And Nate himself had been introduced to the principals by Dave Nichols. And the entire operation is working as well as it is because Nate and his staff all understand how the principles work. They don't teach them formally there, but their presence is such that they're having an impact. They're not behaving in the way that somebody unfamiliar with the principles might behave, and so they're having tremendous success. So while I was there, I just thought, well, I'm a writer. I like to write, and I said, I really ought to create a book. Come down here, live in one of the units in the transitional housing for, say, a week or something like that, and interview some of the folks who are staying there, tell their story, tell Nate's story, because Nate himself struggled some, and the principals got him back on track. Talk to Dave Nichols about how all that came into being. Judy Sedgman used to be a part of that. And create a book, and I don't know what the title would be right now. I'm thinking along the lines of something like Profiles in Transformation, the impact of the Inside Out Understanding on a transitional housing center, or something like that, And it was a very spontaneous moment. A lot of it came up, and as soon as I mentioned it, Nate kind of yes-anded with me, and we built on that, and it's going to happen. So it wasn't something that I'd thought about before I went to Charlotte, North Carolina to visit Dave. It wasn't something that I thought about on the drive over to what's called Independence Place Community Living. I didn't think of it on the way over there. I thought of it in the moment as I was talking to Nate Moore, and he was showing me around the facility and all the rest of it. I like living my life that way because I like to work as much as possible with fresh thought, work as much as possible with a faith in the not yet known, that is, an understanding that what we in the principles community call mind is on our side, has our back, and is an inexhaustible supply of new ideas that we can put into play in our life. And we're only able to do that if we've reached a point where we don't take our personal mind, our personal thinking, especially the contents of our personal thinking, very seriously. And that's where that improv theater has helped me get to that point. And of course, my training in the principles has helped me to become even more effective in that way.
It's interesting hearing you say that, because well, thank you for that. It's reminded me of a number of sort of parallels I've seen between understanding about where our experience comes from and how jazz works, and it's the same. That we sort of aim as a jazz musician to be present and to be dealing with fresh thoughts and fresh musical ideas, and it's kind of, well, it's an illusion to kind of convince ourselves that actually we can plan anything, really. I mean, because it's always coming back to the here and now, and to what is. And so you reminded me of something. I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but I'm aware that a lot of people that played with Miles Davis, who you mentioned before we started recording, he's just behind me playing his trumpet. That sort of when he played what you might consider to be a mistake, that he had an ability to sort of make that mistake seem like it was an intentional, which it kind of became. So and that kind of spontaneous sort of, I don't know, realization that
you're able to work with what comes up, and because you have an attitude of freedom and play and spontaneity, you can make things like that work. One of the things that I did for the center recently was I was on a telesummit hosted by the center about building communities, building community awareness, and it's very three principles or inside out understanding based. And it was a call-in kind of thing. I talked for a while, and then people called in and asked questions. And one gentleman called in and he said, "Well, aren't you just really talking about life? I mean, isn't all of life just an improvisation?" And the host of the show said, "Well, that may be a kind of a catty question. They may be asking, trying to catch you on or something like that." I said, "Not at all. That is absolutely the case. What's interesting about it is, in our everyday lives, we don't generally think of it as an improvisation. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, 30 seconds from now, 2 years from now. It's all a big unknown. And even though there may be some stresses associated with that, all of them thought generated and the consequence of our personal thinking, even though there may be some stresses involved with that, it's not the kind of stress that an untutored person thrown into an improv scene is going to feel. They're going to say, "Well, I don't know. You mean I gotta figure out on the spot what I'm going to do and what I'm going to say and how I'm going to behave and all the rest of it." And you want to say, "Well, yeah, aren't you doing that 24 hours a day in your own life?"
Yeah.
And it's coming out of your own experience. But the other thing, the reason some people are good at it and some people aren't, is that some people have profound faith in the fact that mind provides, however you want to define that this great intelligent energy that's available to all of us and is inexhaustible will provide what you need in the moment. And so you're not caught up in your head about, "Oh, how am I doing? And how's this going to turn out? And will it be good or bad? What will people think?" All that you just let all that go. And life is, it's listening to a new Michael Hill video today, and he was saying, why is it that people make it so hard to let things be easy? Why not just accept the fact that you don't have any control? Your own ego, your own monkey mind, your own personal mind, it's not in control. And actually, that's a good thing, because who are we to try to control what's coming in the future? The future is an incomplete equation. It's always going to be an incomplete equation. Now, you can have two attitudes about that. One attitude is that's dangerous and risky, and you need to be nervous about that. The other option, however, is to say, "Well, that's really exciting. I don't know what's around the next corner, and I can't wait to find out. But and I have faith that it will turn out well for me. But we'll just see. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I don't have any particular expectation or anticipation of how it's going to work out. I don't have any attachment to it. I have nothing on it. I just want to be in the game. I want to bring an attitude of playfulness to my everyday life, and my life will be much, much richer if I don't determine everything in advance, but allow myself to, because if I did that, if I determined in advance everything I was going to do, I wouldn't notice a lot of pieces of gold that would be on my path along the way, because I wouldn't be receptive to them. I'd be following a predetermined path.
The one that's based on a misunderstanding.
Based on a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Because it feels like that we really are able to think about the future, and it really seems like we can feel the future and imagine how it's going to be, and all of those made up ideas about the future are happening right here, right now, spontaneously, and we're not as in control of those made up thoughts as we'd like to think we are. There's an intelligence behind those thoughts, but we're not as in control of it as we like to think. And I know that can be a very provocative thing for people to sort of to be told that they're not as in control as they might like to think they are, in terms of like free will. That there is this kind of intelligence that's supporting our experience and our sort of spiritual energy. What do you make of the whole free will piece?
I think it's kind of a mixed blessing. We also have free will to totally screw things up. We have free will to spin all kinds of stories and create all kinds of unnecessary and confusing and complicated personal thinking that can get us in all sorts of trouble and that we can suffer from. We have free will to do that as well. So I think as long as you understand that thought is a creative resource, thought is like the weather, in that sometimes, you have thoughts that, when thought first pops up, you don't even necessarily know where the thought came from, although it's your thought because it's you and it's based on your prior experience, life experiences that you've had, and your temperament and a lot of other things. But it just you didn't bid that thought to come to mind, and sometimes you don't even know what the thought is. You just are going to experience the associated feeling which shadows the thought. But essentially it's neutral until you decide what to make of it, and then it becomes weather. It can either be clear skies and you're the sky and the sun is there to support you. The sun is this, as we say, this infinite possibility, potential for fresh thought, for new thinking, and all the rest of it. But a lot of people get caught up at the cloud level, and they forget that they're the sky. They forget that the sun is available to them. They lose the warmth of the sun because they're stuck there in the clouds. They forget that that's just a weather pattern that's going to pass over time. Habitual thinking means you could get stuck in a weather pattern for a long time, where cloudy day after cloudy day. So free will comes in terms of is that the choice I want to make, or if I have an awareness of how the human experience works, I have a lot more freedom to make better choices.
Yeah. I'd be really keen to have a chat with you about the parallels that you see between music and acting, and apart from sort of the improvisational sort of fields there, but maybe more generally sort of about performance and about this thing about it was very fascinating to me as a music student, why certain performers had this kind of presence, sort of stage presence, je ne sais quoi, charisma. It's almost like they stand on a stage and they could do no wrong, and yet the others had something in the way, and in terms of how I understand it now, that's all our thought getting in the way. It's thought generated, muddles that we get ourselves into, whether it's thinking about ourselves during performances. But I'd really like to hear what you think about sort of musicians and actors, because obviously your experiences with acting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I can tell you about that, Nick, is that there's a lot of misconceptions about improvisational acting, and I'm sure there's quite a bit about improvisational jazz or improvisational music of any kind as well. One of the misconceptions about improvisational acting is that you're making everything up out of the blue. And in one sense, that's the case because like you and I are basically improvising a conversation right now. I'm working with the context. I'm working with you. I'm working riffing off of whatever you want to call it, what it is we're talking about, building on it, and all the rest of it. So it's not like a complete blank slate. We have a past that has predisposed us to see things in a certain way and that sort of thing. In the case of acting, you don't rehearse what's going to happen with the scene in front of an audience. You do practice improvisation. You practice for the sake of gaining a lot of comfort working that way, and you practice because there are certain conventions at work in acting that make acting more effective. There are vocal conventions, verbal conventions, gestural conventions, presentational conventions, all the rest of it. In acting, just as there are musical conventions that make a piece of music work and sound like legitimate music, right?
Yeah.
And part of that, of course, is working in communion and in cooperation with the other instruments on the stage with you. In your case, you're playing the saxophone and you may be working with somebody else who's playing a trumpet and somebody else who's on a stand-up bass, whatever it is. And all of you practice your instruments. All of you understand basic conventions of music. And yet when you get into the Blue Note in New York and you're together and you say, well, you say to Miles Davis, you say, Miles, let's start us off. And he just kind of starts to play on his horn, making something up. And then you work with it. You work with it and you cooperate with it. You agree essentially with what his jump starting the set, the jam, you agree with it, you work with it, you build on it, and you begin to get into a kind of a flow state with it, in that you're listening, you're contributing, but you've developed over time an understanding of just as an actor knows when to take focus or yield focus on the stage, you know when it's probably a good time for you to come in with your solo, or at least your featured part of the jam, and when to step back and support the other person. Those are conventions, but that's not, you haven't decided in advance that that's going to happen at 4 minutes and 36 seconds into the set. You haven't decided that. It's not scripted, right? It is your ability to be responsive rather than reactive. You know, a reactive person is going to say, oh, gosh, oh, what's he doing? Oh, no. Yeah. And they get all up in their head about it, right? A responsive person is going, yeah, I'm not even thinking in a frontal cortex kind of way about it at all. I'm thinking more on a visceral level. My body is thinking, my senses are thinking, and if there's any thought going through my mind at all, it's just the thought that makes me available to my partners on the stage, the other instruments on the stage. That's it. That's all you need, really, in that kind of situation. But you can't just put somebody up on the stage and say, okay, improvise. They generally are going to do a pretty bad job of that, because they're going to think that somehow there's a set of rules that apply on stage or in an improvisational setting in performance that are different than everyday life. And they are to the extent that social conventions and artistic conventions are a little bit different. Artistic conventions tend to have a little bit more appreciation for structure and form than everyday life does. Everyday life tends to be more, the way that everyday life tends to be improvisational is a little bit more free association, like modernist literature, like reading James Joyce, and one thought leads to another, and that sort of thing. And that's okay too. That's actually quite a lot of fun.
Like free jazz, yeah.
Yeah, but in art, you know, an audience wants to have the apprehension of form, of structure. That they're pattern seekers and pattern makers, and they want to make something out of it. So you let them be the ones who worry about what it all means and how it feels and everything like that, and you just live it. You just live in it. And that's the principles working through you, rather than you making something happen.
Absolutely. And there's kind of this split, isn't there? There's between what's the word? Yeah, between like preparation, like you said, and spontaneity, because of course, you know, and it's the same in jazz, that, you know, there's a syntax, there's a grammar to the language that you speak, but as a musician, but when you show up there, that's not what you want to be cluttering up your mind and sort of cluttering up your senses to be able to do the thing that exactly you're talking about being present with the other performers, because anything that's cluttering that up is going to stop your ability to notice exactly what's happening and be fully with them, you know. And
you know, when we're working with a client and we tell them, you know, you're going to make discoveries, you're going to have insights, if you're able to maintain a quiet mind, operate most of the time without a lot of pre-digested ideas about what's important and what you need to do in life. And the same thing can happen when you're jamming, the same thing can happen in an improv stage. Veteran actors can make discoveries about the potential, that is the expressive potential of themselves as an instrument, as an instrument of an expression that they've never experienced before, regardless of how long they've done it. They could be a 30-year veteran of improv acting and still learn something new about what the capacity of our expressive instrument is. You can be in a jam session and you can discover something that the saxophone is capable of producing that you never knew before, you know? And that's when it's really cool. And it'll surprise you in a delightful way. It'll surprise the audience. It'll surprise your partners who are there in concert with you, developing this kind of ensemble feeling that comes with the delight, the relish, the playfulness of anything is possible. Anything is possible. And if you live your life that way, then there's no boundaries. There's this tremendous freedom that you have to sort of slip away from, like I say, pre-digested ideas or the conceptual mind or rules and laws about how we ought to do stuff, you know? And that, then your life becomes, you see the world as a playground. And then it's just, you know, life is fun.
Yeah.
Life can be fun.
Yeah. It's because I can imagine that some people, when you know, if you say that anything is possible, it can sound, on the one hand, it can sound kind of like a Tony Robbins kind of motivational thing. But you're talking about at the level of, and I totally resonate with it. It's at the level of principle, is that literally we're living in every moment to moment, infinite possibility of directions that a performance could take, and the fact that those those performers, the space within those performers, the kind of spirit and the kind of flow that they all share, it takes its own form in the moment that's right, and no one knows where that's going to go, and so, you know, very literally, very tangibly, that all the options are open, and that you can go any way, and that's, no, absolutely, it's that's the, for me, that's the excitement of doing doing an improvisation, and actually, you know, it's kind of an illusion as well that kind of moment to moment is not going on when there's a more of a kind of structured form to something. Say if you are performing from a script, or from a from a score, if you're a musician, then it's still being expressed, translated, moment to moment. Adjustments are being made. It's just, I suppose, that there is, we perceive that there's a structure. There is a structure to it, but it's still improvisatory in nature, and with that kind of spirit behind it, it'll be much better music, or much better.
That's so important for artists to understand, and people in their own lives to understand, that even if you have some preset, let's say you're talking about your own life. We've got rituals. We tend to do certain things at the same time every day. We tend to do things in a very similar way every day, but it's never the same. It's always the first time. There's always things about it that are distinctive and unique. And what I talk to actors, if I'm working on a play that is based on a script and that sort of thing, one of the challenges for the actor is to not get into a rut and just say, okay, well, this is how I did it last night, so I'm just going to repeat that. I'm just going to do it exactly the way I did. First of all, that's impossible. You can't do it the way you did the night before. But when you try to do it the way you did it the night before, it loses all of its freshness and spontaneity. So I say to them, in my field, I say all acting is improvisational. You might say all musicianship or what have you is improvisation, even if you're working from a score, because you're always making decisions in the moment, in the now. You're responsive to the other elements that are at play in the world around you, and how much freedom and spaciousness there is there.
The space, the acoustic, all sorts of things.
Everything comes into play, and of course, in the performing arts, like you and I are a part of, the biggest thing that is unpredictable is the audience. The audience, as a performer, particularly if you play in jazz clubs and things like that, we play audiences. Every single audience has its own personality, its own temperament, its own set of expectations, its own response repertoire that they bring to it. So that's why no two performances are the same. I might be saying the same dialogue night after night after night after night, but if you were to compare the two, if you were to create if you mapped one performance onto another performance, it would be remarkable how much deviation there is with something that you assume is essentially the same night after night. And the other unknown is, well, the last night your acting partner was fully present and available to you. You had this really broad bandwidth to play with your acting partner. But today, they had a fight with their wife before they came to the theater, and then the director gave them some kind of grief about something they did the night before. So they go into the scene and they're all, they got all this stuff going on, and you can't do your best if those around you are caught up in their personal issues and all that sort of thing. So it's a big unknown. I guess what I like about the Inside Out understanding, probably the most, what I like about it is that the unknown, or the not yet known, is not something to be afraid of. Even, there are people who, starting around age 30, begin to get all preoccupied preoccupied about their own death. And you're thinking, well, so you probably have maybe 50, even 60 years of your life left. Are you going to spend it worrying about how you're going to die and when you're going to die and all this sort of stuff? That's, in a way, a metaphor for somebody who has closed the iris of their life to a very, very limited and narrow set of options in order to maintain safety and security. You can't live your life that way. And you can live your life that way, but you're going to suffer a lot.
Yeah, it's like the performer who goes out on a stage and is so absorbed in how they're coming across that they forget to even notice that there's an audience, like you say, and how they could be responding to the acoustic, the climate, the feel in the room, and all you're experiencing is their thought, their kind of ego-driven kind of nonsense, and no one wants to hear that performance or see that performance, do they? It's
but with all, I mean, we say ego, which makes them sound, I mean, I don't know, narcissistic or self-absorbed or whatever it is, but they're doing it in a sense. It's a self-protective, defensive.
Kind
of knee-jerk thing that they do as a protection. What are they protecting themselves from? A phantom, an idea, a concept, and that's not real. That's not real. Even that moment of death, it's really interesting reading about death. Even that moment of death may have profound meaning and joy in it, possibly. You don't know. To try to decide in advance how it's going to play out takes all the richness and subtlety and nuance out of
it. Yeah. Kind of scary, but kind of beautiful at the same time. Someone who said that it's totally safe. Death is totally safe.
Yeah. Have you noticed, Nick, in your own evolution, as a three principles practitioner, that you laugh more? I do. I laugh more. And the reason I laugh more and that I'm more lighthearted about everything is, one, we don't have any control. So, what have we got to lose, really? Yeah. We are able to see our humanness in a fairly humble way and laugh at our peccadillos and and laugh at ourselves when we get caught up in irrational thinking and we get all caught up in outside in thinking and we go, that's not true. What I was thinking, that's not true. And so you realize that life is one wonderful, marvelous, absurdist drama,
Yeah, absolutely, because it's just such a sort of nasty trick of fate, I suppose, and also such a ridiculous joke that we have so much power to create whatever we want to create, in terms of in the world of form and stuff, but also in terms of our own sort of made up reality, and so much power and creativity to the point that we can convince ourselves that we don't have that power. And then, of course, once you start to see how the whole of that system plays out with a little bit of detachment, you realize it's pretty much an up and down thing, and you see it sometimes and you don't see it some others, and that's just how it works. And like you say, once you realize that everyone's in that soup all of the time, and no one gets to be, particularly more enlightened than anybody else does, then I mean, what can you do but laugh? It's innocent. Everyone's doing the best that they can from the level of their understanding that they have in the moment. Well, of course, it's just how sort of quaintly human of us to get caught up and then to float back up and see things a bit more clearly.
Yeah, my experience with actors has been that the best actors are the ones who are able to laugh at themselves, to know that they're gonna drop a line now and then, that they're gonna make some mistake on stage, but also that they don't see themselves as celebrities. They're not all caught up in their own self-importance or celebrity at all. Jimmy Stewart comes to mind. I used to watch Jimmy Stewart on the old Johnny Carson Tonight Show. This was a humble guy who had flown fighter bombers in World War II after he won an Oscar, who recognized that he was just like everybody else, that he was very ordinary in a lot of ways, that he wasn't any smarter or more talented or necessarily even more interesting than anybody else. He had that kind of humility that came with a level of awareness that we might associate with the kind of philosophical, detached way of being in the world, that's simply enjoying it, just living it, not analyzing it, not working everything out in advance, but rolling with it, riding the wave, all of the metaphors that you can think of, and enjoying our own ordinariness. And and of course, somebody like Jimmy Stewart, his ordinariness meant that he was able to continually experiment. He had a willingness to fail, to fall flat on his face with something. And so his ordinariness became extraordinary. People were drawn to that. People were drawn to the fact that, hey, he doesn't seem to be as he doesn't seem to be wrapped nearly as tight as I am.
Yeah,
So if you spend some time listening to Jimmy Stewart or watching him act, you forgot yourself, because he'd forgotten himself. He was caught up in what he was doing and enjoying it for its own sake.
Well, that's great, because what you're saying, what I'm hearing, and what you're saying is that actually that's not about someone's an admirable sort of personality trait, but it's about a perspective. It's about a kind of level of consciousness that he's in contact with his shared, what he shares that is the same about everybody else, and he's aware of that and doesn't take himself too seriously, because he's aware of that connectedness between himself or the audience or whoever else, and from that place of kind of, I suppose you could call it acceptance, I guess, that who he is shows up more fully without being censored, in the same kind of way, and I've totally had that experience. I mean, before I got into this stuff, I used to be on a gig and we'd be thinking, well, am I a good enough player to be playing with these guys, or am I going to be able to read this piece of music well enough? And was kind of like perplexed by how some other guys could be so sort of jovial about the whole thing and be like not really bothered. And of course, because it's no big deal, they realise that we're just there to do a job. We're all pretty much the same. And as in terms of my evolution, in terms of sort of losing stuff off my mind, well, you show up with nothing on your mind, and you've got the time to notice what's around you, and things do seem more funny, and it's just becomes a bit more of a game, a bit more fun, which is good news for the people I gig with, because otherwise it's a bit boring, really, to be so self-absorbed. So.
Life can be pretty effortless, and it can be quite a fun ride if we don't take ourselves personally. If we don't buy into our own bullshit,
Mm-hmm.
if we're able to, if we see ourselves getting caught up in ego, and we're able to turn on ourselves and just say, get over your bad self, just roll with it. That's where the laughter comes in, because you say, geez, no, there I go again. Kind of, it's lovely to be around people like that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's just so lovely to be around people like that, because when I love that expression, by the way, being wrapped too tight. When we're around people who are wrapped up tight, it's like they've created their own straitjacket to live in, and then expected life to work out well for them. Well, if you're walking around in life wearing a straitjacket, you're wearing a set of self-imposed restrictions or constraints on your life that are entirely thought generated and unnecessary. And who wants to live that way, really? You know, who wants to live that way? But we see people all the time who, in all innocence, believe that that's what they need to do to protect an image or to survive to survive the inevitable. I mean, people are going to trip. People are going to slip on banana peels. People are going to, not be paying attention and walk into lampposts. I mean, it's going to happen. You know, life is going to do that. The question is not whether that's going to happen or not. If you take as a given that a lot of unexpected things are going to happen, that's good news and bad news, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, most of the best things that have happened to me in my life were totally unexpected. Totally didn't see them coming. Now that's true of some of the perhaps least favorite moments in my life as well, but you take the bad with the good, you know, it's just how it goes.
Mm. The idea of
so how are you, how's your musical life working? Are you finding a way are you trying to do, Nick? I think I've just switched roles here. I'm becoming the interviewer, but sorry about that.
Well, we're just improvising the structure as we go along.
Yeah. Are you trying to do something with your music where you say, my music has a lot to teach me about this understanding, and this understanding has a lot to teach me about my music, and then I can also share that with other people? I'm just curious.
Well, it's all one and the same to me. I came to it. I came to it initially about making my own music better, but I've learned that actually what we're talking about is the source of the music, and the source of the music is the same as the source of a relationship, or the source of an idea, an inspiration, a book, a happy life, a miserable life, going back to the source of it all. So, I mean, I started off being interested in improving my own music, and that kind of expanded to helping other musicians. But I've realized it's not actually about music. It's about people, and pointing them in the direction of who they really are, actually, about their innate capacity for well-being, for resilience, and from that understanding, for pointing people to the understanding about how their experience works, then standing back and letting them get on with creating their kind of spirit flourishing. That's wonderful, and that might take the shape of music, or it might mean that once someone's pointed to that, they might want to give up music, which is great, which is fine if that's what's right for them. But it's about helping people sort of unpick the stitches on their straitjackets, and then the next one that's underneath it is like a kind of Russian doll with lots of straitjackets underneath, and we all kind of have them, don't we? And I think some of us sort of we might like to think that we've got fewer straitjackets, but there are always times when we're caught by it. So
you see, I love that, because what that means to me is, what you're saying in so many words is, you are the music, whether you have an instrument in your hand or not. You are the music all the time.
Mm.
And the music is not just you. You're drawing on the music of the spheres. You're drawing on that enormous intellectual or intelligent energy that surrounds you. And as a tuning fork, you're you're calibrating to the music of the spheres. You're more or less calibrated to that. So you're more or less you're more or less the music at one moment at a time. The only thing that stands in the way of the music is a lot of noise in your head. You know, most people don't like discordant music. They want it to be harmonious. They want it to be melodious. And I love the idea that we are, just by virtue of being, we are music. We are enactment. We are artists. We were talking earlier about just working with what shows up in the moment and cooperating with it. Makes you think of somebody like Picasso, for example. There's no way that you could have predicted in his early career some of the things that he would do in mid-career, or some of the things that he would do in late career. He's willing to try anything. Absolutely anything, including wives. I don't recommend that part of it. But I think it's symptomatic of him saying, "Well, let me give this a go."
That's a really interesting point, you know, because I suppose what we're sort of drifting onto is the territory of like, you know, a musician might talk about like finding their creative voice, or you know, finding a direction, or sort of finding a niche or something, and you find that actually with some, you know, with artists or musicians who really are, I think, more sort of deeply connected with the music of the spheres, or you know, the source of their sort of creativity. That, you know, someone like a Stravinsky or a Miles Davis, or Madonna, for goodness sake, you know, people that are prepared to take all sorts of twists and turns wherever they're taken, and they go with it, you know. Or you know, as a sax player, someone like Sonny Rollins, who at the top of his game in sort of late 50s, I think, just sort of had a sabbatical and thought, I need to practice for 15 hours a day, and just decided to take a completely unpredictable turn in his career, guided by wisdom, you know. And that's, I mean, that's something that an understanding of that deepest part of us, you know, when a musician or when an actor or any creative is sort of connected with that deep that kind of deep knowing of what's right for them, then it's a no-brainer for that artist to take that direction. But their audience might be going, well, what's going on? But it's the next step in the evolution, and it's perfectly acceptable to take quite a radical change of direction, just like Picasso. So I mean, that's to me, that's symptomatic of wisdom and someone who's connected with it, you know.
Yeah. So many things flood into me. I'll give you a really trivial example. When I was in junior high school, the first, I suppose you'd say, musical idol that I had, you got to understand now, I was, let's see, 7th grade, I would have been about 12, right? So I'm to be forgiven for this, but I loved a vocalist by the name of Ricky Nelson. Ricky Nelson sang a song, "I'm a traveling man." And so I think his was the first 45 RPM record that I bought. And he produced that kind of music. He was part of a family that did music. They had a TV series and the whole deal. And then he tried to reinvent himself. And the producers and his audience didn't want him to do it. He's now famous for a song called "The Garden Party." Then the lyrics to "The Garden Party" is, he says, "I went to a garden party and I thought I'd be accepted because I was going to try something new, and people wanted me to be my old self. They wanted me to just remain the same, not change, not grow, not evolve." And I think the refrain in that is something like, you can't be what everybody else wants you to be. You
Mm.
have to be true. You have to be true to yourself, even if it meant, in his case, to some extent, in his case, it meant that he no longer curried the favor of the popular audience, producers, and all the rest of it, but he was being true to himself. And so, I honor him for that. And he's a fairly minor figure on the, in the universe, but it's something that I really kind of admire. And there are artists who, not just artists, inventors, people, the Elon Musks and people like that, the Teslas,
Mm.
who say, well, if I did what everybody expected of me, I wouldn't do anything interesting, because there is a kind of a degree to which people are somewhat threatened by change. One of the things that happens is people say, well, I'm going to change, and they change, and other people are whether they're doing it consciously, or saying, well, I don't know, the fact that you've changed may mean that I'll have to change, and I'm not sure I want to change to accommodate your change.
Mm.
And believe it or not, this does have something to do with acting and performing with as a musician, and the three principles, because the death knell, I think, of any sort of life that we try to carve out for ourselves, the death knell is going to be uh, an unwillingness to look to the unknown for fresh thought, for fresh thinking, for fresh experience, all
Yeah.
the rest of it. When we stop doing that, hang up that saxophone, because
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
not going to work. It's just not going to work. So, and I think, most artists know that. And one of the things actually that artists are able to do is inspire people who are maybe in a different kind of domain. Maybe they're in technology, maybe they're in business, whatever it is. But they need to bring the same kind of fresh creative thinking to what they do. And you probably encountered this in your own work, that it's often the artists who are the clairvoyants. They see things before the rest of the world does. They
Mm.
see things before governments, before industry. They see things, and in fact, they, in a sense, they provoke things into being by
Mm.
virtue of having the courage to live that way.
You see, that could be a slippery one, though, can't it, as well? Because it can be easy as an artist to maybe be aware of the fact that your job is to provoke, and to go searching for something provocative, and not be listening to fresh thought and
Your own
wisdom.
wisdom. Yeah.
And you can fool yourself into thinking that you're being innovative because it's controversial, but it's still kind of not kind of selling out to a gimmick, and it's still in its own way kind of currying favor of the artistic community. It's not really about the urge to create from an authentic place, from a place of wisdom. It's kind of thought masquerading as wisdom.
Yeah.
And people, it's the same
Usually,
misunderstanding.
I agree. That is a slippery thing, and there are landmines that we can accidentally step on by I guess misinterpreting the signs out there, by misinterpreting when we go in a new direction. Are we going? And I think it has to do. This is going to sound a little strange, maybe, but the people I've found who are the best three principles coaches are people who do what they do from a place of profound goodwill. And that's a kind of a self-effacing. Well, they take themselves out of the equation to a large extent, except for the understanding that they have gifts that are available to them from that resource, from that intelligence. If they are caught up and maybe are doing something like you say for the reasons just to be provocative, usually it's, life has a way of, we talk about karma and that sort of thing. What life has a way of letting us know that that you're out of phase when something like that happens. It's like, how we talk about feelings, Nick.
Yeah.
And we say, what is the function of feelings? Feelings are, I think Jamie Smart likes to equate it with the rumble strip on the highway. If we suddenly begin to experience intense feelings, it may mean we've perhaps deviated from that path of right thought and goodwill. And by right thought, I don't mean in the sense that there's a right or wrong, but that we're following, that we're not becoming someone who is prescribing in advance every step of the way how it's going to play out.
Yeah.
Right. And so that rumble strip of feeling tells you, oh, I think I may be doing this just because I want to be provocative and not because there's really a good, spontaneous, immediate discovery to be made there.
Yeah, it's a really.
And that's why we're a marvelously self-correcting mechanism. Our whole idea that our physiology is a homeostatic thing. That it's constantly, it's never in total equilibrium. It's always striving for equilibrium, but enjoying the fluctuation. That's the dynamic. That's the dynamic of being in a homeostatic system. If we get too far out of balance, we probably get too far out of balance because we forget that it's all an inside job, and we get caught up in something outside of ourselves, and we get caught up in that innocent misunderstanding. So we're getting awful philosophical here, Nick. We're getting awful heavy.
It's deep, man. I love it.
Somebody's going to be listening to this going, oh boy, they're totally full of their own crap,
Well, yeah, aren't we all,
And that's why we can laugh at ourselves. We can do that.
Well, I mean, this thing about the rumble strip. I mean, that's a really, really important thing for people to know, and there's so much value there, and it's also so widely misunderstood. This idea that if you're feeling feelings that are like the rumble strip on the side of a road, then that it's giving you feedback about the state of mind that you're coming from. So if you are having thoughts about, oh, should I do this? Am I doing this to be too provocative? Am I selling out? That's feedback that you're not really clear about it. So maybe not the time to sort of pack in your good your particular sound and sort of change direction, because maybe that's not wisdom speaking, but if you find yourself having changed the sound already and having taken a different course of action, then if you've got nothing on it, there's nothing going on that's extra to that fresh thought, then it will happen, and it's the right kind of it's wisdom talking. It's that deeper part of a creative creating, and they don't think twice about it, and that's a good sign. So it's an infallible mechanism. There's no separation between thought and feeling. It's got one job, and to give you feedback on the kind of the type of creating that's going on, the type of thought that's going on. And there's so many people that are wondering about how they should find their sound, or how they should manage their career. Well, they need to get quiet and listen, allow themselves to get quiet and listen to what shows up, and it'll happen I mean, quite tangibly, it will happen by itself without all the bullshit in the way. It's and that can seem quite slippery, but we've got this perfect, like you said, this psychological kind of homeostatic system that is there to give us feedback, not feedback on our feelings about the situation or the outside world, but feedback on the whether our thought is ebbing or flowing. And that's, this is really, really quite a powerful understanding. I've just got so much kind of respect and kind of reverence for it almost, because it's was it Elsie Spittle that described it as the birthright of people. It's really important that we do know how our minds work, because if you don't, you get into so much hot water, and creating a bit of music or doing a bit of improv acting is the least of your worries, isn't it? Because we can convince ourselves that our well-being is at stake, and and it's we're safe. It needs to be shared. It needs to be, and this is why obviously we're having this conversation, so that those three people that are still with us after this long in the conversation are noticing that this is it's profound. So it's good that we're deep, man. It's good.
There's a couple of wonderful coaches that are running a program this summer that they call the Pause Place. And I was talking about the rumble strip. It made me think about the times I hit the rumble strip is when I need to get off the road at a rest area, get out of the car, or stay in the car and take a nap, or get out of the car and walk around for a while, or something like that. Change my environment a little. Get out of the driving mode, and kind of wake up. Because if you think about it in terms of acting or playing an instrument or something, if you're hitting the rumble strip, it means you're not responding to the conditions in front of you. You're caught up in something else, and that bring off onto the rumble strip. Time to get off and take a break and clear your head, because otherwise, then I would be a danger to others. So I pull over to a place and regenerate, recharge my batteries, get my focus back, and we can do that. We can do that throughout our lives. We have moments of transition in our lives developmentally where we need a pause place. No. I mean, have you had times in your career where you feel yourself moving or gravitating in a new direction, but you know that you need to give yourself a little bit of time, and or your wisdom is saying, I just need to kind of take a time out for a while. Not worry it, not analyze it, not try to manage it, but just keep my ear to the ground and see what comes up, because I'm me, and there's a lot of energy out there that I can draw on, and with a quiet mind, that it will, the mind wants what's best for us. Mind has our back, and we can count on that. I think that's a definition of faith, perhaps. Faith in how it works, how we work, how human behavior and human experience really works, without making it work.
Yeah.
I love sitting around talking to you. Actually, if we had like 2 or 3 other people, we'd have a regular symphony going here. And then we could say, well, what's happening right now in front of us is exactly what we're talking about. Whoa.
No, it's good. It's good. We should do this again.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, and we should set up a group call or something. That'd be really cool. I think it'd be really nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much, John, for your time. And where can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out and get in touch or find out more about what you're doing?
Right now, the easiest way for them to get in touch with me is to email me at Countryman Coaches, all one word, no dots, anything in it, just Countryman Coaches, lowercase, @gmail.com. I'm in the process of buying a domain name that somebody else already has. Ultimately, I want to have the domain name. I want to have an email that is johnCountryman@theunderstanding.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having to buy the understanding.com part of it. So I can't, until I can legally make that email address, I'm going to stick with this old one.
Sure.
And my
Sure.
working address.
Good stuff. All right. Good stuff. Well, thanks very much again for your time. Absolute pleasure speaking.
Absolutely. Beard's looking good. And just, and make music, Nick. And we'll talk to you soon.
Nice one. Thanks, man.
You bet. Cheers.